Welcome back to the Israel Connection, everybody. I'm Esti Zenati, and I have a very special guest today. I have Blake Flayton. Blake is a Jewish writer, activist. He's a student at Bar-Ilan University in Jerusalem, and he's a co-host of the We Should All Be Zionists podcast with Dr. Einat Wilf. Blake, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
So, I know you've been an activist for a long time now. I've been following you on social media for a while, and I've seen, all the tweets and posts on Instagram and everything, and you've been doing an incredible job. What made you get into this?
So when I arrived on my college campus in the autumn of 2018, I went to GW, George Washington University in Washington, D.C., which, if anybody has been following the news about anti-Israel activism on college campuses, they will have definitely they'll definitely be familiar with the climate, particularly at GW. But I arrived on campus not caring that much, or really at all, about Israel, about Judaism, about Zionism, about antisemitism, any issue that I talk about today. I got to campus and I wanted to become a progressive activist. That's what I did in high school. I was the president of my Young Democrats of America chapter on my high school campus. I wanted to intern for all of these different progressive organizations, and indeed I did. I interned for my congressman on Capitol Hill. I was involved in all of these student organizations and different movements on and off campus for any cause that you can think of, for a $15 minimum wage, for LGBT rights, for racial justice, for economic justice, climate justice. That was really my MO, working for Elizabeth Warren's 2020 presidential campaign eventually. However, when I got on campus, the strangest things started happening. And that was anti-Semitic incidents that were pretty high profile amongst the student body, meaning everyone knew about them. They caused scandals at the university. And I want to make clear that these had very little to do with Israel. I can give some examples. There was an LGBT Pride March in DC in the summer of 2019, where the organizers banned the Megan David Pride flag. So a rainbow.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and that was a huge wake-up call for me. I was like, wait, what? Because I had never, I still don't understand their methodology behind it. I mean, that's kind of a lie. Now I am very familiar with the methodology behind it, but I was shocked at the time, let's just say that. And when myself and a bunch of Jewish LGBT activists showed up at the march with our flags in hand, they actually formed a barricade to prevent us from participating, from taking part. There was a video on campus that leaked of a student filming another student in a dorm room, in my dorm building, saying, "What are we going to do to Israel?" And she responded, "We're going to bomb Israel, you Jewish pieces of shit."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There was a march for a $15 minimum wage for the janitorial staff at GW that for some reason descended into a Free Palestine rally where Students for Justice in Palestine turned the conversation, or connected the conversation, of janitors at GW not being paid enough to live in DC. For some reason, that was very related to the occupation of the West Bank and the...
Of course, like everything else these days.
Right, and the continuing oppression of Palestinians in the region. And again, I didn't know much about Israel. I didn't know much about the Palestinians or the conflict in general. I didn't know much about Zionism. I definitely, at this point, would not have called myself a Zionist. That was a word that I sort of associated with, the AIPAC Jews, like the Jewish extremists and the Republicans, and I was definitely not that. But they started adding up. There are more examples that I can think of where, Zionists were banned from participating in different club meetings around campus from different left-wing organizations. And again, even not identifying as a Zionist, I knew that that smelled incorrect, that
What
was
year
wrong.
was that?
This was 2018, my freshman year of
2018.
college, 2018, 2019. And so basically these events added up, along with some personal comments that people had made to me about Jews living in Israel. And it all sort of boiled over, and I started writing about what I was experiencing. And I was lucky enough to have my account of these experiences turned into an op-ed for the New York Times about campus anti-Semitism from the people who I had always considered my, ideological compatriots, and my friend group, my social circle, really through and through. And that op-ed completely changed my life. It was the #1 trending op-ed in the New York Times for, I think, at least a week. And I realized after that two things. One, that I was definitely not alone in this feeling of sort of betrayal and isolation, because I got in touch with, or people got in touch with me is more accurate, hundreds, if not thousands of people from across the country and the world, young Jews experiencing the same thing, their parents concerned about where to send their children to school, faculty, administrators, and Jewish community leaders. That was the first thing that I saw. And then the second thing I saw was that I experienced even more isolation and sort of ostracism from my social circles after that opinion piece came out, which stood in stark contrast, of course, to how I understood progressive spaces to operate, where if somebody in a liberal setting voices grievance that they're being treated unfairly because of their identity, whether they be a student of color, a person of color, LGBT, immigrant, I mean, you name it, there was always a sort of recognition among the community and an acknowledgement that they needed to do better and working to fix it. And that didn't happen with me at all. In fact, the opposite happened. The antagonism against me just got stronger. And not a single, actually, that's not true. One administrator from my school reached out to have a conversation with me about it. Not a single one of my professors, but one administrator. And it was like a, sort of like 12, 15-minute conversation in his office. I could tell he really didn't want to be there.
Yeah, just to put a check mark next to it.
Yeah, just to put a check mark next to it. And remember, this was in the New York Times, and I was accusing, the school of having an anti-Semitism problem, and nobody seemed to care. And that really flicked a light switch inside of me that this is a huge double standard at play, and there is something motivating these behaviors and attitudes aside from whatever Israeli policy one might disagree with, to say the least. And so that sort of set me on this trajectory. I didn't start the online activism until really the summer of 2020, because that was, as a lot of people remember, the summer of BLM. And when social media kind of took on this whole new role of being a platform for activism from anybody. And in fact, it was expected of a lot of people, especially in my social circles, to use their social media to advocate for Black Lives Matter and for progressive ideas in the US. And sort of at the tail end of that, I realized that I could start doing the same, but for Jewish issues, specifically Jewish issues concerning Jewish college students. And it really just took off from there. I started posting a lot, and it was during COVID, so I really didn't have anything else to do. It really set me on this path, and I've been doing it ever since, is the nutshell explanation.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I mean, I'm sure people realize that because we said the year was 2018, but this whole thing happened way before October 7th.
Oh, yeah.
So I mean, a lot of people thought that it started October 7th, but it didn't. It started way before then. It was just not as in everybody's faces as it is now, I feel like.
Right. And so many people have told me since October 7th, and especially since the news about the encampments and the really vile protests that have taken place on college campuses, they've said, like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't listen to you. Like, you were banging this drum
Yeah,
for years, and yet, we just sort of overlooked it. We thought it was dramatic, or we thought it wasn't as serious of an issue. And, my response to that is it's the really most depressing vindication ever, because I never wanted to be wrong
right.
about something before so much.
Yeah,
Um, but there's been a lot of us actually who have been on this path since long before October 7th, because we experienced it long before October 7th. And then there's been a lot of course, new voices since October 7th, a lot of new people on campus making their voices heard. And that's good to see as well. And it's not good to see because of the circumstances we find ourselves in, but
yeah. I mean, unfortunately, we needed that kind of wake up call for more people to join and act and fight for Israel and the Jewish people. Because, I mean, I was involved in the whole thing that happened before. I was very involved with the Jewish community on Twitter and social media in general, and I know what's been going on. But a lot of people around us were like, "Oh, you're just exaggerating." Those Jews again, they exaggerate. But I mean, this is not something we want to tell people "I told you so" about, but it is. We did tell them. Yeah.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
you mentioned earlier that you didn't, I guess, look at yourself as a Zionist before. So now that you do, what is the meaning of Zionism for you? What's a Zionist to you?
A Zionist to me is something very simple, and it's someone who believes in the existence of a Jewish and democratic state, in part, not all, of the biblical land of Israel. And to me personally, the tenets of Jewish and democratic are equally important. I do not see the Zionist vision being fulfilled because again, I come from a progressive background, I come from a very liberal background. That makes me uncompromising about the democratic aspect of the state. But it also makes me very uncompromising about the Jewish liberation aspect, meaning a Jewish majority state where Jews are able to fulfill their right of self-determination in their homeland. That does not exclude the right of anybody else to self-determination in their homeland, but as I'm sure we'll get into, that's not really up to me.
So I know you made aliyah recently.
Yes, about 2 years ago. I can't believe it's been 2 years.
Wow. So how
Yeah.
does it feel? Like, first of all, what got you to do that? What made you decide that? I mean, you're young, you have your whole family in the US probably, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whole
So, and
family, yes.
then did you move by yourself?
Yes, completely.
All right. So what made you go, down that route?
So it's a sort of a complicated answer, but can be condensed, I think. I realized as I continued my work in Jewish activism and Jewish commentary, before I made Aliyah, I was writing as a weekly columnist for the Jewish Journal of Los Angeles. I was a freelance writer for different Jewish publications, Tablet, Haaretz, etc. And I realized that I was not getting the experience of a true, genuine Jewish identity in the United States from the way that I wanted to fulfill my Jewish identity. And what I mean by that is I've always been not just a non-religious person, but an anti-religious person. I find religion to be extremely problematic and very anachronistic in a lot of ways. And I found that the really only way to express a Jewish identity in the United States was through religion. And that could be Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, Orthodox Judaism. I have a problem with all of it. So, I found it to be isolating to view Judaism as a culture, as a peoplehood, as a nationality, first and foremost, and yet to not have an avenue to express that, because really the primary expression of Jewish identity in the United States is going to synagogue, going to shul, celebrating holidays, fasting on Yom Kippur, doing all of those traditional rituals in however in whatever level of observance you wish. In Israel, I found it is the complete opposite. Not for everybody, but
Yeah.
particularly for my tribe in Tel Aviv, it is largely the opposite phenomenon where, you could be a gay, eating on Yom Kippur, shrimp eating, shrimp eating on Yom Kippur, um, Jew who never really gave much thought to religion and God, and yet still feel instinctively 100% Jewish because you are speaking Hebrew, because you are in a land of Jewish self-determination, because you're going to the army, because you're sending your children to the army, and you are living in a place that is viewed by the rest of the world as the Jew among nations, and therefore you sort of take the form of the Jew in the eyes of all other peoples in the world. And we forget that Israel was launched and established by secular Zionists, by people who had this same idea that in the modern age, Judaism makes a lot more sense as a nationality than it does as a religion. And secular Jews need an outlet to express that identity away from the decrees of religious leaders and rabbis. And that's, to me, what sovereignty is all about, the transition from rabbinut to ribonut.
Right.
And I feel extremely fulfilled by that promise. And that's why I encourage a lot of young secular Jews in the United States and around the world to make aliyah, to fulfill that aspect of their Judaism. And I also fight for that idea very strongly in Israel as well.
Yeah, I saw that they started promoting aliyah in the past few days. I think Montana Tucker, she did a video with the, I don't know if it was Misrad Klita or it was something else that they're promoting aliyah, to young people. So it's interesting because I know since October 7th, there have been a lot of, I don't know the exact number, but there have been a lot of aliyot, a lot of families with children.
Yes, and it's sort of like the great sorting, and this is what happens in Israel a lot, because there's people leaving, which is
Right.
a shanda, and I hate thinking about it. And every time I hear that another person is leaving Israel, I mean, I understand because it's a very chaotic and often complicated place to live, but especially people amongst my own community, like the liberal secular tribe, who are more likely to leave, which is so an anathema to me, but to each their own. When they decide to leave, it's very depressing, but then I hear 3 people who are coming. So it's sort of like this sorting, this
Yeah, it evens itself out, kind of.
Yeah, it evens itself out. The Jewish community in Israel always finds a way to do that. Always kind of.
I think especially during wars, I feel like people feel more connected somehow. And I think that this current war, I think, from my perspective as an Israeli who moved here and this whole thing, I feel like more people feel more connected.
Yes,
kind of
I would hope so.
I mean, it looks like it, I don't think it's ever been this way before, from what I can tell.
We will see the numbers probably for like the exact numbers of who left and who came for a while, but I really hope you're right. I hope you're correct in that.
Yeah. So unfortunately on Sunday, we were notified that 6 hostages were executed by Hamas. Hirsch, Eden, Almog, Alex, and Carmel. And I know, I'm sure it angered you as well, but the way that the media covered this in the US, the way that they said they were found dead rather than what actually happened, how does it make you feel? What do you think about everything?
Well, it was a very dark day, and it still remains dark. I'm not in Israel at the moment. I'm visiting family in the US, but I hear from my friends over in Israel that the darkness of that moment when the news broke has not at all worn off, as it shouldn't. It will stay with us forever. People are depressed, people are angry, people are very frustrated with the current situation, as they have every right to be. And that definitely applies to me as well. I'm not going to lie. There's been a lot of times since October where I've fallen into very profound pessimism and cynicism about the state of the country and where the country is going. In regards to the media question, I mean, it's just so typical.
Yeah.
I don't really pay much attention to sort of Western mainstream media outlets because even if they style themselves, experts and analysts on the conflict, they're always going to get something wrong. They're always going to mess up in their wording and their framing of what's actually going on. For instance, it's like, I am against Benjamin Netanyahu as much as anybody, and I would like to see him out of office as much as anybody. But the sort of the liberal mainstream proclivity, let's say, to blame everything on Netanyahu and to just make him the boogeyman and the bad guy in the unfolding of events since October. And, everything would be fine if Netanyahu left. And everything would be fine if he wasn't obstructing a hostage deal. And they don't get into the details, of course, of what that deal is or what the debate is within the cabinet about the specifics of that deal. It's very annoying.
Yeah, they forget that we're dealing with terrorists on the other side. There's not really much room over there.
And they also just don't know the intricacies of Israeli politics and the alternatives and the pros and cons of every policy decision. And so it's a very surface level analysis of what's going on, even if it's good intentioned, even if
we all know it's,
Well, it's depending on the outlet. There are certainly outlets that are not that do not have good intentions, that wish to frame, Israel as the ultimate oppressor and Palestinians as the ultimate victim. But even if someone is giving what they think is an even-handed discussion of Israel and the conflict, it's usually missing a lot of critical information. So I make a habit of ignoring it and also not speaking about it with Americans because it's sort of like talking about somebody. It's sort of like talking about inflation with somebody who has a trust fund. It's like they could get into the surface level, the overarching themes, but they don't really have that personal stake. They don't have that horse in the race. They don't have that intricate knowledge of what's actually going on. And so I can't really get anywhere. So I've made that a habit of not talking about Israeli policy except with Israelis.
Yeah, I mean, I think some American Jews are very involved with everything that's going on in Israel, and they do understand to a degree, but it's hard to understand the full picture 100% if you don't live there, and if you haven't experienced it yourself.
Yeah, and also it's about what media you consume. Even if you're American Jew, when I say Americans, I don't really mean just living here and even never having been to Israel. I mean sort of the archetype of an American who just watches CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, in the sense of where they exist only in the American media digest, the mainstream American media digest. There are plenty of ways to live outside of Israel and to be very educated on the conflict. And that's about, who you read online, what podcasts you listen to, if, you've made an attempt to speak Hebrew or connect with people in Israel. All of those things matter. So yeah, that's important. When I say America, I mean sort of the milquetoast, I'm going to turn on cable news and get my information from the round table, and that's it.
Yeah, there's a lot more, other than cable news and all these outlets. There's so much information out there, and people just need to go and look for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree.
So you have a wonderful podcast with Dr. Einat Wilf, which we had on our show a month ago. She was here at Bethel, and it was a really, really nice evening. So what can you tell us about the podcast? It's called We Should All Be Zionists.
Mm-hmm. So the first thing I'll say is, if anybody is updated on the podcast or is an avid listener, I'm so sorry that there has not been an episode in a while. I was away. I am away. Einat was away for a while, and so we haven't been in the same space to record. But season 2 will be coming out very shortly. I'm heading back to Israel in a couple of days, and we hope to record right away, because the demand for it has just been incredible. Something that we did not expect. I mean, people are so supportive of the pod and so engaged and intrigued and want to know when the next episode is coming, want more. And we've gotten so many compliments from people, and I guess we knew it would be successful, but not that successful. So it's very exciting, and we're very grateful. The podcast started, well, I'll say that a couple years ago, Einat Dr. Wilf, who is a former member of Knesset from the Labor Party, and has been really one of the most articulate and effective defenders of Israel and Zionism, really over the last decade or so, speaking around the world and in Israel itself about the different problems facing Israeli society. I would definitely look her up. She has a lot more content than just the podcast.
Yes.
She published a book of essays, a compilation of essays called We Should All Be Zionists, each essay touching on a different aspect of Israeli and Jewish society and their relationship vis-a-vis the rest of the world, including the Palestinians and the Arab world. And the podcast started as Einat reading an essay, and then followed by a short conversation between me and her about the themes and the context and the central arguments of that essay. And we're running out of essays now. So over the last couple episodes, we've been expanding into Einat's broader repertoire of work, articles published in different magazines and newspapers. And then the conversations have been getting, slightly longer at the end.
Yeah.
I have more and more of a input and things to add because people love it. People say that the conversations are really eye-opening, whether they be about, the conflict, whether they be about the protest movement in Israel, whether they be about the history of Zionism or Jewish history, really anything. And we're really excited to continue with it.
That's awesome. Do you guys have listeners from all around the world?
Yes, all around the world, South America, Europe, the Middle East even, which is very exciting.
Oh, outside of Israel.
Outside of Israel,
Wow.
yes. That's amazing. And Einat is really focused on connecting with that audience, by the way. She just posted a bunch of YouTube videos that are translated into Arabic. Her talks about Judaism and Zionism have been translated into Arabic, many of them. But yes, audiences from all over the world, all ages, good stuff.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
So you're now at Bar-Ilan University, right? And
Yes.
your major in politics?
Yes, so I'm getting my master's in religion and politics, yes.
Wow. So what do you hope to do when you graduate? What's your goal?
Well, I'm taking about 18 months off. So it's a 2-year program, and I just finished my first year. I just turned in my finals for the first year, and I'm taking about 18 months off to do something that a lot of people can probably expect. I won't necessarily get into the specifics because I'm still waiting on exactly what I will be doing, but a lot of people can probably guess. I will be taking a good amount of time off, and then I will be coming back to finish my second year, which is the master's thesis. And I mean, after that, who knows? I mean, who knows what's coming? I really hope to get into politics in Israel eventually.
Good luck with that. That's gonna be.
I know, right? Everyone says that. It's a sort of a kiss of death, even just to want it. But I think I would probably start with Tel Aviv local politics. But if that doesn't work out, which, who knows, because it's a while away, I definitely want to continue commentary, writing, speaking, talking about these critical issues. And even I would consider teaching. I love speaking in front of young people. I just was at I was invited to speak at the summer camp of BBYO in Pennsylvania earlier this summer, and I really gave, I think, really important presentations, a couple of them, and I received really great feedback from them, and that's really my passion. I love doing that. So why not teaching? The world is my oyster after that. I'm excited.
So what's your message to all those new students that just started university recently? Because I know the school year just started. So all those high schoolers and university college students.
Yeah, make aliyah. Because, I mean, listen, I don't see this problem getting better whatsoever. I have a lot of projects coming up in the next couple of months that, try to take a stab at making it better. And those are necessary. And, we need all boots on the ground. We need all of the voices we can to try to turn the tide. But if I'm really being honest with myself, in the next, couple of years, just based on the trends in American politics and the way that the younger generation thinks, I don't see this hostility becoming better, even if there isn't a war going on in
Right.
Israel.
Yeah.
Because these ideas that, Israel is this white supremacist, artificial colonialist enterprise, and that Judaism is only a religion with no rights to land and self-determination, I think these are too entrenched. And they've been pushed. It's not an accident that these have happened. They've been
No.
pushed into the minds of our young people by Middle Eastern studies departments and far left activists for decades now. And it's, you can track it geographically. You can literally track these ideas from their origin in the Soviet Union. And then a couple decades later, they sort of infiltrated Europe. And obviously Europe has a huge problem with them now. And then a couple decades later, they entered sort of Anglo-Saxon discourse and ideology. And it would take a miracle to stomp that out. One of the things that sucks about being Jewish is that we're tiny, and it's very difficult, no matter how much leverage we have in the political space. It's very hard to sort of turn the tide on anti-Semitism once it sort of comes crashing down. And so I would say make aliyah, not in the reason of, you're running away from something, but in the sense of that it could be hugely beneficial to your Jewish identity as well, and hugely beneficial to your understanding of who you are in this world as a Jew. And also future generations will thank you for it, because it really sort of changes the trajectory of your family.
Right.
So I can't recommend it enough.
So in the meantime, before they make aliyah, because I'm sure a lot of them in the future are thinking about that, how can they cope with everything that's going on? How can they deal with all these haters and they raging anti-Semitism on college campuses? What can they do?
So they really just need to be as educated as possible. And again, that extends far, far deeper than just a surface level knowledge of Israel, a surface level knowledge of Zionism, a surface level knowledge of the conflict and the Palestinians. It really means taking the time to read as many books as possible, to listen to as many different speakers as possible, to understand the history through and through. And if you do that in an effective way, it all just sort of becomes noise. It's very troubling and disturbing noise, of course, but you have a higher sophistication that puts you at a class above the discourse on campus, which I think is very important. Not just, to push back on it and to, stand up for yourself and to stand up for the community, but also for your own soul, right? Have this greater understanding of who you are and who the Jewish people are and who Israel and what Israel is. It's like it elevates you. It makes you feel better about the situation because you see how just stupid everybody else is. Which
exactly. You don't just follow everybody like a sheep. You just really get into it and understand why this is the way it is. And do you have any recommendation for books or articles they can read?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I mean, we're probably not gonna have time to do them all, but definitely listen to our podcast. That's a shameless plug. Sorry, I have to do it. We should all be Zionists. I would definitely read one of the first books I think I read when I was in college, and it's such a classic, and yet not many people have read it, is just Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, Yossi Klein Halevi. It's fabulous. One of my favorite Israeli academics is Shany Mor. That's Shanymor. He's definitely an underrated thinker on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Haviv Ratigur is this sort of really jack of all trades commentator on the Israeli condition, and he's writing a bunch, and he's on all these different podcasts. I think Call Me Back with Dan Sr. is one that he's on quite often. Definitely listen to that one. The Times of Israel Daily Briefing is a 20-minute news survey every morning that comes out. And, a lot of things you might know already because you read the headlines, but it gives you a greater in-depth analysis of them. Read Tablet magazine, even if you don't agree with every article in Tablet. I certainly don't, but read Tablet because they a lot of times host the best and the brightest, in my opinion. What else? Oh, Isabella Tabarovsky and her sort of understanding of Soviet anti-Semitism is very useful and fabulous. God, there's so many. But that's anyway, that's a lot.
Maybe we can post a list.
We can definitely post a list. Yeah, that's a lot. Right there. Oh, Sam Arano. I just discovered this YouTuber. This is sort of random, but I just discovered this YouTuber who is so fabulous. I mean, I can't believe I didn't know who he was before. Basically, what he does is like, he's not a historian. He's not like an influencer. He's not like a political force in any way. But he makes these like 40-minute video essays on YouTube, and he really like condenses like dissertation level information into these 40-minute videos about Jewish and Zionist history. And I think they're just like really incredible. I think they're really, really, really informative. And if you can watch them without having to pause every 5 or 10 seconds to really understand what he's saying, because it's a lot of information, then definitely get into that.
All right. Well, lastly, where can people find you on social media or read your articles?
Yes, people can find me on social media. I'm at Blake Flayton on Instagram and Twitter. I don't use TikTok, not because I don't want to, but because I don't know how, because I have the technological skills of a boomer. So Instagram and Twitter, at Blake Flayton. You can follow my Substack and subscribe to my Substack. I haven't written anything in a while because, I've been very pretentiously wallowing in writer's block in sort of this Kafkaesque type way. But it's Bourgeois Nationalist is the name of my Substack. Please listen to our podcast. Again, it's We Should All Be Zionists. And stay tuned in a couple of months for a very big announcement coming from me about something that you can hold in your hands. And I think that's it.
That's great. Well, Blake, thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you all for listening. Until next time.
Until next time.